Knutson, who's the New York field organizer for network and climate strategy with New York Audubon.
So before we get started, I want to set the tone. Audubon occupies a unique niche within the environmental community. We actually identify as a centrist organization. We're bipartisan, so making sure that we're working down the aisle with both parties to create that effective change for birds moving forward. This is kind of the demographic of our membership throughout the nation. So 52% identify as Democrat or progressive, while the remaining 48 are conservative, moderate, Republican. It's important for us to have an inclusive space no matter where people land politically to work forward and move forward on solutions. So this is just a unique little makeup of what Audubon is. In New York, this actually leans a little bit more blue. We're about 60-40, so 60% of our members identify as Democrat, 40 being the other. So Audubon has a deep history in advocacy. We got our roots advocating against feathers in the fashion industry way began when we first started our organization in the early 1900s. Move forward to 1918, that's when we celebrated the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It was a treaty against Canada and New Mexico, allowing our birds migrating through. It makes it illegal to possess, hunt, kill most native species of birds. Right now, it's under threat with this administration. If you could sign the cards, that'd be great. I'll collect them and send them on behalf of all of you. But we want to write that to Senator Schumer, a key player in the fight. And any type of support we can show really helps him when he goes to bat in the office. And we'll be talking a lot more about that issue in slides to come, but I just want to keep plugging it in. So again, feel free to pass it off to me at the end. There should be some pens rotating around as well. Move forward, we battled DDT in the 70s, right? Huge pesticides in the air that was just wiping out bird populations left and right. Fast forward to present day, we're fighting for public lands, places that we all need to recreate and our birds call home. Again, throughout history, Audubon continues to advocate and will always be an advocacy type of organization. So our mission is to protect birds in the places they need now and into the future. We do this by focusing our efforts on the migration patterns of birds. Again, birds are migrating a great distance. Think about it. They're in our backyards, but they're also potentially in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, or they're going down to Costa Rica, chilling with the spider monkeys and toucans. I mean, it's crazy that that same bird in our backyard can go somewhere else and call a place called home. So again, we split the US into 4 main flyways: Pacific, Central, Mississippi, and Atlantic. Ours is the Atlantic flyway. So New York, along with its northern counterparts, work closely with southern state offices as our birds are migrating that direction to reach warmer weather in the winter months. And some of us may also migrate south during the winter times as well. But again, thank you all for being here because it's getting chilly. So we also focus our efforts on a 5-tiered strategic plan. They cover coast, working lands, water, bird-friendly communities, and climate. My work exists within the latter two, but they're all interconnected, especially when we talk about climate change. So to give you an idea of what each of these priorities exist, coast is making sure that shorebirds have safe areas to nest. We have fenced off areas, make sure that beach goers don't go in them. Oftentimes they have, dogs, et cetera, on the beach. So we just go out there and educate people. These are the rules of the beach. We all want to call it home. Make sure that you stay out of those fenced off areas. Working lands, we're making sure that we're working with farmers and ranchers to find productive yields that can also support bird populations. So best management practices and making sure that we can have agricultural exist while also having conservation of birds, et cetera. Water, we all need it, right? It's important to make sure that it's not polluted. So we're supporting restoration efforts, making sure that our wetlands are pristine. All of it helps to filter back to us and our communities and our health. Bird-friendly communities is exactly like what it sounds. It's making sure that birds have a place where we call home as well. So just making sure the places we live are inclusive and welcome populations to thrive now and in the future. Lastly, for climate, it's the greatest threat to birds and other wildlife, and just making sure we're moving away from the fossil fuel industry and supporting the clean energy economy. Ultimately, what we want to do, right, is to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions and make sure that when we do promote renewables, they're responsibly sited and not impacting or negatively decreasing bird populations immensely. And I'll talk a lot more about that throughout the program. So we also engage our network in a variety of campaigns. They're all geared to create that greater demand for change. All of these programs have handouts on that table. I'll talk about them briefly and we'll mention them throughout, but please go home and read those things a little bit more thoroughly too. So Climate Watch is our newest community science initiative. It's helping to document bluebird and nuthatch populations as they're migrating due to climate change. So this helps us understand, are they in areas that they're supposed to be? Are they migrating to places we didn't expect them to be? And these are counts that happen biannually, and it's just a day. You go out through a month period, and you record it onto eBird. How many people are familiar with eBird? Yeah, it's a great online technology. You can do it from your backyard, from your community park, and it all helps inform our science and policy and how Audubon really identifies places to protect. So again, that happens in January and June. It's pretty easy. You go onto eBird one morning, you pick sites via GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, gather some of your friends, and you just count and see the bluebirds and nuthatches. And again, all helps us understand how are birds reacting to climate change, where are they going, where do they need protection, et cetera. Right now, we're only focusing on those two groups of species because they're easy to kind of bring people into the fold. But we will be expanding and making it more inclusive of all the great birds that are at risk in this world. Clean energy for a healthy climate, that's working with municipalities and towns, making sure that they have a climate action plan set in place, making sure that they have an idea of how to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to support the clean energy economy and away from divestment of fossil fuels. That's something we'll be launching more in January. I'll be talking a little bit more about how we're preparing for that fight ahead, and would love if any of you in this room want to pursue that moving forward too. Plants for Birds is an easy backyard solutions. You root a native species in your backyard, and it does help bird populations thrive immensely. We kind of say plant them and they'll come. People are amazed when they do something simple, just like rooting a native species. It helps to absorb carbon into the ground, helping to restore habitat that's often been fragmented by community development. So again, it's easy. When someone's like, I don't have a lot of time, I want to make a difference somehow, what can I do? Telling them to plant for birds is something that we all can if we have the space available. Lastly is the bipartisan climate solutions. It's making sure that we're talking to whoever's in power and making sure that they support, policies, legislations, things that help birds at risk in the changing world. Not anything that may damage both communities, wildlife, et cetera. So we're just helping to do this primarily through the ambassadors, setting up meetings with municipalities, with elected officials, and having a presence locally. And that's kind of where the Audubon chapters play as well. We have 27 throughout the state. As Carrie mentioned earlier, Sawmill River Audubon is the local representative, but there's many throughout the Westchester area too. So again, all to create that greater demand for change. By creating that greater demand for change, we can push policymakers to be more proactive on climate solutions. That can have ripple effects not only on the local and state level to national climate policy, which the end goal is to really create these stable populations and protected habitats for birds. And again, we also need those places to survive too. Where birds prosper, so do people. Within Audubon in New York, there's 100 species at risk by climate change. And I'll be talking and highlighting a little bit of those for you next. Alrighty, so in 2014, Audubon released their Birds and Climate Change report. It detailed out of 588 North American bird species, 314 are predicted to lose more than 50% of their current climatic range by the year 2080. So through 40 years of data and breeding bird surveys, Audubon predicted future ranges, and again found out that out of 588 North American bird species, 314 are at risk in climate change. This was all geared through citizen and community science initiatives that Audubon historically has been doing. So has anyone partaken in like the Christmas bird count or backyard bird count? Great. All of that information helps to inform us what birds we're seeing, where they are. And again, when we have that history of data, it helps us understand again how they're moving and shifting. So predicted future ranges based on the past weather data and anticipated warming. We're going to be launching Climate 2.0 in months to come, and that's going to take more of the vegetation and habitat in consideration into our climate models. Currently, we don't have that, but oftentimes vegetation is moving more rapidly and species are having a harder time finding that habitat. And they're having to migrate greater distances to meet the resource needs that they're used to and dependent on. So here's a graphic you would see if you go online. This is for what species? Does anyone know? It says right there, Scarlet Tanager, yes. So this shows the summer range, again, from the 200s to 2080. Essentially what we're seeing is that it's going to be migrating northward to reach higher altitudes, places that it's suitable throughout time to kind of live and adapt. So in New York, that means that it will faintly be seen in the Adirondacks and the Catskills, but again, evaporate completely from the state. So a lot of species that we know and love in our backyards, our homes, our parks, etc., we may not be able to enjoy them simply by walking through them again. I know when I think about having kids or grandkids, I want them to enjoy the simple pleasures that I had, right? Something I think that you all can relate to in this room. The fact that species may not even have a home that they do now is frightening and is an urgent ask for us to move forward. So again, here's a chart to better visualize the species at risk. Again, 588 total in North America, 314, again, at risk by climate change. Break it down, climate and threatened face half of their current climatic range by 2080. So again, that's this bracket. 126 of them are climate endangered, and that's 50% of their current climatic range by 2050. So it's a much more immediate threat for them. I'm not going to dive into the ins and outs of our climate reports, but essentially what we're seeing is that habitat is shifting and it's shrinking, while we also see habitats across the US expanding like desert ecosystems. So again, birds are having to shift their migration patterns to thrive and adapt. And the species that are more generalized, that don't have specific niches, will be the ones that will be able to thrive in the face of climate change. The ones that aren't so adapted are going to go to these areas potentially where there may be competition otherwise or limited resources already, and we might see even further declines of their populations. And some of those we've already seen, like the wood thrushes. Are people familiar with those? A fantastic songbird, right? That kind of nests in the canopies of our trees. But if everyone signs the postcard and they put their email, I can send you the climate report and other information in a follow-up email from this event. A lot of information is online. It's just audubon.org/climate. And those maps that I showed you earlier, you can pull up for every species that are at risk and kind of see where they're projected to go in the face of climate. So, in order to fledge and to have their offspring thrive, a lot of birds need that insect and proteins, right? So, and they expect their breeding and return patterns on the insect populations coming back. Well, they're coming back sooner due to climate change, the insect populations, and birds haven't quite figured that out yet. So they're coming at a later time, and they're not able to get the nutrients they need in the places where they expect to go in order to have successful reproduction. Catcher, it's this charismatic bird. You're going to find them on the shores of Long Island. Actually, with climate change, Long Island's going to become kind of a hotspot for these birds. We're going to see more and more of them, which is a weird thing, right? But that's because habitats that they depend on in the south will be evaporating due to sea level rise. And that's expected to happen sooner than it will in Long Island. So these birds, again, are going to need our coasts and shorelines. And we recognize that, so we've been trying to be active in wetland restorations, making sure, again, that beachgoers stay out of fenced-off areas. And that's where we have the program called Be a Good Egg, having stewards go out on the beach, talking to locals, making sure that they know the rules, that they're being sensible in their actions, because oftentimes, nature doesn't come in mind. People just kind of want to enjoy, right? But there's repercussion and cost with all of that. So we try to get out there and do public education as much as we can and reaching those new audiences that Audubon historically hasn't engaged. The Baltimore Oriole, a favorite with its vibrant orange hues to our backyards, will actually be seeking higher elevations due to climate change. So that would be the Adirondack Mountains, the Catskills, etc. Needs those cooler climates. Doesn't really like the hot weather, right? I'm just the same. I'll retreat to the mountains any day. But to help this species thrive, we're actually promoting our Plants for Birds initiative. Again, there's tons of handouts on the table, but it's pretty easy. So you type in your zip code. Email is optional if you want the list sent to you, but it will generate a list of native plants, the birds that it will attract, and it takes you to the next step and it tells you where you can buy them locally, right? And then it also connects you to your local Audubon chapter, other key players who can help facilitate it. And they'll often, take it from this idea that you have and help you with the design of your garden etc. So it's a great resource. It's not just telling people what they can put in their yard, but it goes the next step in telling them, here's where you get it. This is what you can do with it. So again, this helps birds immensely because our populations have become really fragmented, the habitats. And again, any type of things that we can do in our backyard to help regenerate that habitat really helps birds thrive. And like I mentioned earlier, they need that insect and proteins and other things that native plants provide, like nuts, seeds, nectar, etc., to make sure that as they're migrating through, that they're stopping over, they can rest and nest and thrive. So that's just one way we're helping the Baltimore Oriole out in the face of climate change. The next one, who knows this one? Yeah, it's the white-breasted nuthatch. It's in fine print down here. But this is the program that we're promoting through Climate Watch. Again, great handout, happens biannually, January and June. And what you go out just one day and you count as many as you see, and it helps us understand how they're migrating and how they're being impacted by climate change. Lastly is the common loon. Many favorite, right, in this room, the haunting calls. I grew up on the lakes of Minnesota and have fond memories of, just being out there enjoying the loon. Same with the Baltimore Oriole. The loons are going to be seeking higher elevations and will actually be retreating more to Canada. So we may see them in the Adirondacks, but they're going to be quite faint in the Catskill Mountains. One way we want to help them out is through important bird areas. These are areas that have been scientifically selected based on the habitat requirements, resources available, etc., to help populations thrive. And adopt an IBA, an important bird area, is similar to just like adopt a highway. It's you just steward. You go out and you protect this area. And a lot of Audubon chapters are active in doing bird walks there, etc., and making sure that people are connected and are aware that these areas exist. Next, I want to transition to kind of more of a sociological take on climate change and what are the perceptions in New York, particularly in Westchester County where we are now. So the great news about climate change is that 77% of New Yorkers believe that global warming is happening. That's actually, yeah, we laugh, but that's actually a higher ratio than many places across the United States. So this map put out by Yale shows the concentrations of believers in darker, and then in lighter shows a little resemble of mixed feelings. So here in Westchester County where we are now, it's 76, so just below the state average. And you can kind of see nearby counties either falling above or below. So this is based on a subset of the populations that respond to mailers and phone calls, just kind of gauging their public perceptions. And what we see where people disagree about climate change is what's driving fluctuations in temperatures. A lot of people just think it's a natural occurrence and not driven by human activity. With that said, if people do disagree on what's driving fluctuations in temperatures, we can still come to a common ground in promoting a solution, right? We don't necessarily have to agree to put something forth that's positive and helps birds. So here's the survey questions that they asked people in Westchester County. So again, 76% believe that global warming is happening. 60% believe that it's caused by human activities. There's even some ambiguity on if we trust scientists about global warming, right? Many people are worried about global warming, about 69%, but only 46% believe that it will impact them personally. Again, we know in this room that global warming is not this far-off issue, right? It's happening and has been happening here locally in our backyards throughout the state for decades, eons, et cetera. And the thing about climate change is, yes, it may have been happening, but never at this rate of acceleration. So when we go further into it, only 66% of people think that it will harm folks in the US. Asked about developing countries, it increases slightly at 71%. Even a bigger increase when asked if it will harm future generations. Again, people don't think it's going to impact them personally, but yeah, down the line it's going to be an issue. The great thing about Audubon, we're all about birds, about 75% believe it will harm plants and animals more than it will impact them personally. So we have a unique position to kind of move forward and pivot people through birds as our messenger to act on climate change. What do folks think? A compelling enough reason to help birds in climate? Great. So here's that map that shows caused by human activity. Same thing, darker areas show higher concentrations of believers that it's caused by human activity. Lighter areas resembling some of that mixed feeling. It's not, it's just natural. So in Westchester County, actually above the state average at 60%. Nearby counties either falling above or below that average of 58. But you can see here that Western New York and even Pennsylvania here have really blue areas. Does anyone have any ideas from the audience of what might cause some ambiguity in believing global warming is driven by humans? Anyone? Okay, industries maybe persuading people's perceptions. Other ideas? Yeah, the media kind of crafting the culture of what people see and hear about. Other ideas? Those are both good. That's what other people have said as well. They think it may be socioeconomic status, lack of resources, integral in like schools and public outlets like education centers, et cetera. And especially in this part of Pennsylvania, there is a lot of fossil fuel drivers, which can definitely be an economic incentive for people not to believe that global warming is happening. Yeah, right. So it puts food on the table. Of course, it can be happening, right?
Probably those blue areas, those are fracking areas in New York.
Yeah, this is the southern Adirondack region, and then I think just below Watertown over here. But again, especially with superstorms and some severe rise of temperatures, I think folks downstate are seeing the effects more personally, just like other parts of the US as well. And again, when people always have a personal connection or it has affected them in the past, they're more willing to act on it, of course, right? Again, if we have Lyme's disease, we're going to be more active in defending or promoting solutions, right? So this is an interesting study to follow up from the maps. This is 6 different Americas of climate change beliefs. It falls on a spectrum from alarmed, concerned, cautious. That's primarily you all in this room. But there's also disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. And these are your deniers over in this column. So we've elected people in power who may fall on this spectrum, right? Absolutely. But with that said, they may indirectly help birds without knowing it, right? Putting up a bird box, they have a bird bath, maybe they have a native or 2 in their yard. There's ways that we can, through our conversations, identify where they fall in the spectrum, and then based on where they are placed, give them solutions or actions to help them move along and make the connection. A lot of people need guidance, let's face it, right? It's not black and white. It's this really ambiguous issue, and folks need it bring it down a little bit more. And again, whenever we can do that on the local scale or through a personal connection, people are more likely to act because they can see the relevancy to them. And there's many ways to do that. Obviously at Audubon, we're gonna do it through birds and the environment. But for many people, health is a factor, right? How is climate change affecting their health? My dad, who is an avid sportsman, identifies as a Republican. His passion is hunting. That's his bread and butter. And until one season, when the ticks were so bad, they had to cancel, hunting season. And I think that's when he started to make the connection. The light bulb clicked. And for him, that's where he's like, okay, maybe my son isn't this whack job. Like maybe it's something real. So that was a win for me. But my roommate in college was also a denier, and he loves skiing. And I was like, how do you not believe this? We're having shorter winters. The season in which we're able to recreate and enjoy isn't as lively as what it used to be, right? And so one summer it happened. We just had a brown winter, and that's where the connection clicked. And for a lot of folks out there, unfortunately, it may not click for them until they firsthand experience it. But it's important our conversations that we have, no matter who they are with, to continue to push and move forward. And we'll talk a little bit about strategies to make that happen, to be effective in having conversations about climate change. We also did this study with Audubon members. We were curious, where do our members fall on this spectrum? Any guesses? Yeah, so our members, boom, they are alarmed and concerned. And this was actually done in 2013. This was before the release of our Birds and Climate Change report. So we're thinking it'd be interesting to do this again. But members that did fall on this spectrum, I think, have now hopefully transitioned over as what motivates them and they're passionate about is severely at risk. So again, at Audubon, we like to make it about birds. You know, when people talk about climate change, I think they want to, you know, bring up temperature graphs and charts, and they really want to show that there's the science here. But the public overall kind of distrusts scientists, as we saw in the graph, and that may, you know, go over their head, or they might immediately shut down. Again, what motivates people the most is when they can make it more local and personal. How is it affecting me in my backyard or my community, et cetera? And we can all make connections throughout here. I love this bird. I was at the Croton Park earlier today, and there was tons of buffalo heads. So I was just like geeking out before this presentation, and I thought I would let you all know. And again, making it hopeful helps with your talking points and entry. I think if you make it like it's, you know, we're all screwed, this is just gonna impact us all, we might as well throw in the towel, people are gonna be paralyzed, they're not gonna know what to do, right? We have to give people hope, and we can be those agents of change in making it simple and practical that, okay, yes, writing to your representative does help. You know, planting this species in your backyard, you know, does make a difference. Like, these are all things that we can do here. So again, making it hopeful has a lasting impact versus, you know, coming at people like it's over, you know. We're done. So, you know, people like to know what they can do. I think they're naturally curious and they need that guidance and help. And so just, you know, instructing people, guiding them along the way, whether that's putting up a bird box, whether that's signing a petition, again, all of that makes a difference. And there's no need for extremes. The doom and gloom element, it's easy to do when we talk about climate change, especially with the recent report from the UN. But again, that doesn't motivate people to act. That only paralyzes them and makes them think that the issue is too far out there for them to make any personal effects on it. But again, if we're all kind of helping to influence our sphere of connections and our areas that we have kind of a sway and lean, that all adds up, right? The small bits do add up, and again, helps to make that greater impact. So these are just some phrases, if you are gonna use birds as your messenger, to use and then avoid, and a little bit of the explanation behind them. So phrases to use, you know, birds are already experiencing the facts. Terms to avoid, you wanna say, scientists tell us. Again, because there's this distrust in science, I think public perceptions are more likely to act on this than this. Small changes in temperatures are hurting birds versus really kind of laying it out, 1.4 degrees over the next 100 years. That's really hard for people to conceptualize. And again, it's all in who you're talking to. Some of these may motivate people, but again, the general public, it might not just click for them. Habitats, they're shifting, they're shrinking. You all in this room, I can tell you by 2080, you know, the range will decrease by X amount of %. And then for other people, especially within the church community, expressing that they have a moral duty and kind of stewardship to protect the earth may help move them forward. Again, do people find these useful? People see that they can use them in their dialogue? Yeah, I've seen a lot of head shakes. So what we like to do is just come up with an acronym for climate. And it's come together, listen, introduce, make it real, address concerns, take action, and exit with grace. The hardest part is probably the first step, right? Getting people to come together. We're all busy. People have different motivators. Look at you all in this room. I'm happy, you know? Job well done. Another hard thing to do is to listen to them. You know, people are gonna come out with their perspective, and it might not match with your own. But again, hearing them out helps them think later that, okay, I'm more willing to change and do something or act on the issue because that person heard me out, instead of, you know, beating down their throat, no, you ignorant. You know, just